Now, most economists point to China as a factor in the worldwide stock rout we're seeing. So I first asked Paul if he sees China as the cause or the catalyst. And here's what he had to say.
I don't think China has much to do with it one way or the other. The reason we think China is responsible is because that's what the American financial press tells us. Of course, we ourselves couldn't be responsible. We've been told that we have a recovery. The unemployment rate is low. The Fed is going to raise interest rates next month because the economy is so sound. So all of a sudden, the market falls out. Well, the financial press, who's been telling us all of these stories, they don't want to say, oh my gosh, we were wrong. So they have to go find somewhere else to blame. So they blame China.
So, okay, what do you think is going on here?
Well, you know, the stock market has been a bubble for a number of years, just like the bond market. It's pumped up with all the Federal Reserve liquidity. And also now all the liquidity from the quantitative easing from the European Central Bank, from the quantitative easing from the Japanese Central Bank. All of that money has to go somewhere. So where does it go? Usually it goes into share prices. And so it's a bubble. And so it's a huge bubble. It's been going on for a long time. So I think some people decided to lighten up their positions.
Well,
the market opened down a huge amount this morning, but the last I looked, which was not long ago, most of that decline had already been erased. So I don't know whether this is going to be a major correction, or whether the plunge protection team has stepped in and is buying S&P futures and supporting the market. I don't think we'll know. It's too soon to know.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you. We are looking at a number of markets selling off around the globe, and in emerging markets, at least, economies are suffering. So do you see this as the beginning of a crisis, at least in that sense?
Well, you mean as another financial crisis? I think the economy has been in a crisis ever since December of 2007. I don't believe the recovery. The reason they have a low unemployment rate is they don't measure the unemployed. If you're really unemployed, they just don't count you. So we have all this sort of rosy picture that's been painted. It's important to sustain the dollar in its world reserve currency role. And I don't think that that this market has been in any way real. You know, we have seen the reports that six stocks account for more than the entire gain in capitalization in the S&P index. We've seen that almost the same six stocks count for over half of the gain. I can't remember where it's in the NASDAQ or the Dow Jones. So when a tiny number of stocks are accounting for the rise in the market, and then we know that so many of the firms are using their profits plus taking bank loans to buy back their own stock. So if you see the stock is supported by buybacks, and that only 6 companies can account for most of the gains, then you know the whole thing is rotten. And so it's just a question of time until there was some sort of adjustment, some sort of correction as to whether this is just starting of a correction that's going to be major. But then we have to also consider that central banks, there's no limit to their ability to create money. They can create any amount of money. They can buy up the entire equities of the world. And I was amazed to learn that the Swiss National Bank, the Swiss Central Bank, has a very large portfolio of American stocks. And that in the first 6 months of this year alone, they bought about 4 million shares of Apple. So when you have this type of buying from central banks supporting, see, Apple is one of the 6 stocks that accounts for all the gains. And yet we see it's the Swiss National Bank buying the stock. The other stocks, it's their board of directors doing buybacks. So the whole market is it's not really a real market. So it's been a rigged market.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. Some analysts have pointed out that what we're seeing today is almost at the same level, in magnitude at least, of what we saw in 1997, 1998, and then again in 2007, 2008. Do you agree with that at the least? I mean, what do you make of that comparison?
Well, I just don't know. I mean, the market opened down 1,000 points, the American stock market. Dow Jones was down 1,000 points this morning when it opened, but all of that's been almost erased. I think it's now down only 100 and something. So why is it erased? Have the market players changed their mind, or has the plunge protection team come in and supported the market by buying Standard & Poor futures? I don't know the answer. We'll see what happens later today. We'll see what happens tomorrow.
Okay.
You can't tell at this point, but we do have a new development, and that is the participation of central banks in the stock market. You know, a central bank is supposed to be dealing in bonds to kind of control interest rates, either to encourage employment or to dampen down inflation. But to have central banks taking enormous positions in stocks, that is something new. I mean, how many banks are doing it? If the Swiss central bank is doing it, who else is doing it? Why are they doing it? Are they acting as an agent for the Federal Reserve? These are the types of questions that financial journalists should be investigating, because never in any of my studies in economics or any of the classes that I taught was anybody ever had any idea of central banks owning stock.